Good morning, and we're talking about what happened at this church in St. Paul. This shows the degree to which these protests have expanded in Minneapolis, and this particular incident is now triggering a federal investigation. A group of protesters stormed and disrupted a Sunday church service because of one of the pastor's possible connections to ICE. The U.S. Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights announced there would be a federal probe over this, writing this on X. The Civil Rights Division is investigating the potential violations of the Federal FACE Act by these people, desecrating a house of worship and interfering with Christian worshipers. The White House, meantime, is considering a federal troop deployment to Minnesota with 1,500 troops now on standby. President Trump has raised the possibility of invoking the Insurrection Act if the violent protests there continue, and that drew a swift rebuke from the mayor of Minneapolis.
This act was clearly designed to intimidate the people of Minneapolis, and here's the thing. We're not going to be intimidated. If the goal here is safety, we've got many mechanisms to achieve safety. Right now, we have about 600 police officers, and they've got 3,000 or so ICE agents and border control. That they are now talking about deploying 1,500 military. This is, well, it's ridiculous, but we will not be intimidated by the actions of this federal government.
The troops are from the U.S. Army's 11th Airborne Division. They're based in Alaska, and they specialize in cold weather operations. They are now on standby should the president order them in. And Todd and Carly.
All right, Doug Lazater live for us in Washington. Doug, thank you. Let's bring in former DHS advisor and former Secret Service Supervisory Special Agent Charles Moreno. Charles, thank you so much for joining us. So over the weekend, as Doug was laying out, you had the disruption of this church service where people who were praying were forced to leave. Many people across the country are going to see that as a bridge too far. There's this other viral video that shows an ICE agent speaking directly to the camera as protesters were honking their horns, saying, what you guys are doing right now, you're supporting a child sex predator who we are trying to arrest. So that video is also going viral. Just your thoughts on these two incidents as those protests are still raging on in Minneapolis.
Well, good morning. There's been a lot of red lines crossed already, both by the governor and the mayor of Minneapolis, as well as these protest groups, some originating from the local area. But as this continues to expand, many protest groups will continue to originate from outside the area and even the region as they become more organized and more disruptive. Look, unfortunately, the position of Democrats and sanctuary cities is not going to change anytime soon. They are going to continue to play a role in inciting and obstructing when it comes to the enforcement of federal immigration laws, and they'll continue to villainize ICE at every opportunity they get. This can all be much simpler for authorities in Minneapolis if they collaboratively worked with ICE, allowed them into the jails, and allowed their state and local law enforcement to work with them. But that's not something that they choose to do. Instead, they choose to give unrealistic ultimatums to the federal government, saying that in order for things to be peaceful, ICE needs to leave. And that is never going to happen.
So, in light of what you just said, we have federal troops that are at the ready, in position, should Donald Trump send in the troops, the federal troops, to Minnesota.
Well, I was on record here the other day with Fox and Friends saying absolutely. The conditions exist on the ground. The president has the clear authority, and the Insurrection Act should, in fact, be invoked. It has become impossible and very dangerous for ICE and CBP to execute their statutory authorities within Minneapolis. And at some point in time, the courts also need to play more of a role here. They have boxed the president in. They have said that while he's allowed to federalize the National Guard, he's not allowed to deploy them, that he needs to exhaust all full-time resources. Well, full-time resources includes our full-time military. And that's why you now see 1,500 full-time military on standby, ready to come in. But the Insurrection Act, I think we're going to see sooner rather than later.
Well, the president has put 1,500 soldiers on standby for possible deployment. At the same time, the governor has placed the National Guard on standby for potential deployment as well. I mean, if both groups of service members are deployed, who will be defending what? And what does that look like?
Well, if the president declares the Insurrection Act in effect, then he takes control of both the full-time military and the National Guard. So we wouldn't have a scenario here, which we've heard Mayor Fry of Minneapolis talk about many times, where we'd have a situation of state and locals fighting with ICE agents. I know they'd love to see that happen, but it's not going to happen. I don't think you'll see state and local law enforcement ever follow that type of guidance. But when it comes to the military, we would not have a scenario where the full-time military is now going up against the National Guard because one was activated by the local government as opposed to the federal government.
Meantime, the New York Post is reporting that a socialist group here has plans to round up more than 4,000 individuals for what they are referring to as a rapid response team. These individuals are then going to protest ICE and do a lot more than protest, as the article explains. So if they obstruct federal law enforcement, Charles, do you think DOJ needs to prosecute every single one of them in order to ultimately send a message in order to get this obstruction to stop?
Yeah, I've got to say, like I said, the red lines have been crossed, especially in Minnesota. I believe investigations should be well underway, not just being looked at with respect to obstruction, incitement, as well as threats against federal agents. And I think those charges, or potentially those charges, should be explored in other sanctuary locations as ICE continues to carry out their mission. Law enforcement's going to have to pay very close attention to the intelligence here regarding these groups. Many of them radical, many of them going to be aligned with groups like Antifa and others that are going to want to come and are going to want to get violent and mix it up with federal agents, because it's the narrative of Democrats that it's ICE's fault. ICE should be villainized. Law enforcement is at fault here for the situations that exist on the ground. And that's entirely false. And I don't think the overwhelming majority of the American public are buying into that nonsense.
The nation watches as New York City could be next. Former DHS advisor and former Secret Service Supervisory Special Agent Charles Marino, thank you.